Throughout history, the contributions of soldiers have often been celebrated, yet the narratives surrounding these brave individuals frequently overlook a significant group, Black soldiers.
You're putting together a documentary right now on Black soldiers in the Civil War.
There were roughly 200,000 African-American men who fought in the Union Army and Navy for their own freedom and the freedom of their loved ones. One of the misconceptions in American history, and there are many, or lies about African-American history is that Black people didn't fight for their own freedom during the Civil War. Simply not true. They fought valiantly. They actually risked more being Union soldiers because the Confederacy made it clear that if they caught any Black man in a Union uniform, one of three things were going to happen, and did. They either lynched them, murdered them right on the spot, or re-enslaved them, because many of these men were former enslaved people. But the third thing that they did was to put them in Confederate war prisons. They couldn't afford to surrender.
From the battlefields of the American Civil War to the trenches of World War I and beyond, Black men and women have played pivotal roles in shaping the course of history, often at great personal sacrifice and in the face of systemic racism and discrimination. Their stories are not just tales of valor, but they are also powerful testaments to resilience, courage, and the relentless pursuit of justice. In this video, we will be examining the untold impact of Black soldiers in the history of the United States. Before we proceed, do not forget to support our efforts by hitting that like button before you. Share with your family and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening Black narrative, and kindly subscribe to stay tuned in for more informative stories ahead. Now, to the nitty-gritty.
African Americans have been participants, willing and unwilling, in this country's military from the American Revolution up to the American Civil War.
And the story was always the same. Brave, valiant warriors who never got the credit they deserved, despite the extreme racism they had been facing as people stigmatized for their color. All that didn't matter for a people who would do just anything to 1. Be free. 2. See their generations free. 3. Be respected equally as whites were. And 4. Attain unmatched reputation in the U.S. Army.
These soldiers were rising in the rank. They had authority, and they were showing their ability as men.
This was more than just a milestone. It was the beginning of a long, hard climb up the ranks. From emancipated enslaved person to enlisted man, to non-commissioned officer, to West Point cadet, to captain, to general. This was indeed a hard climb for survival for people of color, but they made it through anyway. Many would as well die in the cause of trying. They would embrace even very terrible conditions in their fight for the survival and sovereignty of the United States.
Even though the Union had won the war, racism was still alive.
In terms of just life in the arid southwestern deserts, just the extremes of the climate made for a very unpleasant experience.
These places are very isolated and separated from large populations. And so this is not an easy life.
African Americans have participated in every war which has been fought either by or within the United States, including the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, the World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, the war in Afghanistan, and the Iraq War. But the contributions of these soldiers throughout history are often overlooked, yet their impact has been profound and far-reaching. Here are a few stories that highlight their untold contributions and the lasting effects they have had on American society and military history at large. Number 1, the impact by the Buffalo Soldiers.
What does it mean for Black patriotism for Buffalo soldiers who are certainly brave, actively engaged, and trying to demonstrate their citizenship, but at the same time engaging in horrendous acts against indigenous people? It's a difficult thing to swallow.
Buffalo soldiers were just protectors of the American West. If you were traveling from San Antonio to El Paso, Texas, during the 1870s, 1880s, and you were pinned down, who would most likely come to your rescue. Somebody in blue. And at that time, the men in blue were black.
The Buffalo Soldiers was a nickname given to members of African American cavalry regiments of the U.S. Army who served in the western United States from 1867 to 1896, mainly fighting Indians on the frontier. The nickname was given by the Indians whom they fought against. The term Buffalo Soldier was supposed to be an insult due to the curly hair texture of the buffalo, which most of the black American soldiers had. But the true instinct of the animal, the buffalo, is that of bravery. During a storm, most animals would run away, but not the buffalo. It would stand firm and trudge towards the direction of that storm. This was the exact character which the African American soldiers embodied in the face of the storm of adversity, racism, and extreme climate. An 1866 law would authorize the U.S. Army to form cavalry and infantry regiments of black men. The resulting units were the 9th and 10th Cavalries and the 38th through 4th 1st Infantry. These four were later reduced to the 24th and 25th Infantry, which often fought alongside the cavalry regiments, where the law required their officers to be white. However, the 10th Cavalry, originally headquartered at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, was commanded by Colonel Benjamin Grierson. His men were provided with aged horses, deteriorating equipment, and inadequate supplies of ammunition. Their duties included escorting stagecoaches, trains, and work parties, and policing cattle rustlers and illegal traders who sold guns and liquor to the Indians, but their principal mission was to control the Indians of the Plains and Southwest. After the Red River Indian War between 1874 to 1875, the 10th Cavalry was transferred to Texas, where the 9th Cavalry, commanded by Colonel Edward Hatch, had long been based. The combined forces fought outlaws and Indians who often conducted raids and robberies from sanctuaries in Mexico. They carried out a campaign against the Apache, who were resisting relocation and confinement on reservations. After numerous battles with Victorio and his Apache band, the soldiers managed to subdue them in 1880. While the 10th Cavalry continued in action against the remaining Apache for another decade, the 9th was sent to Indian Territory, later Oklahoma, to deal with whites who were illegally settling on Indian lands. From 1892 to 1896, after Grierson's retirement, the 10th Cavalry relocated to Montana Territory with orders to round up and deport the Cree Indians to Canada. The Buffalo Soldiers were noted for their courage and discipline. Drunkenness, which was a widespread problem in the Army, was rare among them. Also, in a period when nearly a third of white Army enlistees deserted, the black soldiers had the U.S. Army's lowest desertion and court-martial rates.
The black regiments had traditionally higher esprit, lower desertion rates, higher reenlistment rates, only because there were so few other options for them. And so if they deserted, where are they going to desert to? At least if you're in the Army, you have food, you have shelter, you have pay.
In nearly 30 years of frontier service, the Buffalo Soldiers would take part in almost 200 major and minor engagements. From 1870 to 1890, 14 Buffalo Soldiers would be awarded Medals of Honor, which was the Army's highest award for bravery. One of these remarkable soldiers is Sergeant George Jordan. George Jordan was a notable figure in the Apache Wars, serving as a Buffalo Soldier in the 9th Cavalry Regiment. During a skirmish near Fort Tularosa, New Mexico, Jordan would demonstrate an astonishing feat which cannot be erased from the sand of time. At this point, his detachment would be surrounded by 100 Apache warriors. George Jordan would defend a small settlement with only 25 troopers.
Sergeant George Jordan was defending a small settlement with 25 troopers, and they put up a very stout resistance, and he was awarded the Medal of Honor for that.
Jordan and 18 other black soldiers were awarded the Medal of Honor in the Indian Wars. One of those soldiers awarded alongside George Jordan was Sergeant Ed Davis. This strong black man of extraordinary character would show unmatched bravery by protecting a railroad camp that came under attack from the Cheyenne in Wakini, Kansas.
Sergeant Davis, with his company, is able to get into an elevated position and actually kill about 13 Cheyenne warriors. So what Sergeant Davis does is very admirable and heroic because of the fact that he is greatly outnumbered and he doesn't lose any men.
Soon, these black regiments would earn a nickname that will outlive them all, the Buffalo Soldiers. Going forward, The 9th and 10th Cavalries would further distinguish themselves by their fighting in the Spanish-American War, where they fought bravely in battles such as San Juan Hill, and in the 1916 Mexican campaign. One of the 10th Cavalry's officers was John J. Pershing, whose nickname Black Jack reflected his advocacy of black troops. The contributions of the Buffalo Soldiers were vital in the expansion of the United States and the establishment of law and order in the West. Number 2, the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment. The 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment was one of the first official African-American units in the United States Armed Forces. Led by Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, an American commanding officer, the regiment fought bravely in the assault on Fort Wagner in 1863. And here's the story. Following the Emancipation Proclamation in January 1863, President Abraham Lincoln called for the raising of black regiments. Massachusetts Governor John Andrew quickly answered Lincoln's call and began forming the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry Regiment, which was one of the first black regiments ever to serve in the U.S. Civil War. Black men from across the city, state, country, and even other nations traveled to Boston to join this historic regiment. Initially tasked with manual labor details and the ransacking of Darien, Georgia, of which Shaw did not approve, the 54th did not see real action until a skirmish with Confederate troops on James Island on July 16, 1863. This fight provided the 54th with combat experience and earned them the praise of their fellow soldiers from the 10th Connecticut, whom they helped save from Confederate attack and capture. A certain journalist would write,
probably 1,000 homes from Windham to Fairfield, Connecticut, have in letters been told the story of how the dark-skinned heroes fought the good fight and covered with their own brave hearts the retreat of brothers, sons, and fathers of Connecticut.
Though weary and weakened from battle and march, Shaw and the 54th would readily accept the opportunity to lead the assault on Battery Wagner, the strategic stronghold guarding Charleston Harbor, on July 18, 1863. Knowing this battle would prove vital to shaping public opinion about the use of black soldiers, Shaw had told his men,
"How the eyes of thousands would look upon the night's work."
Though they fought gallantly, Shaw and many of the 54th lost their lives in the ensuing battle. The 54th Massachusetts suffered roughly 42% casualties in this horrific battle against a strongly defended enemy, with more than 270 soldiers killed, wounded, captured, or missing, and presumed dead of the 650 men of the 54th that participated in the battle. However, Sergeant William H. Kearney, who was born enslaved in Virginia and had settled in New Bedford, Massachusetts, after escaping bondage via the Underground Railroad, had participated in the battle. Though severely injured in the assault on Wagner, he saved the national colors after the color bearer fell. Kearney recounted,
"I suddenly saw the old flag fall. I threw my gun away and grasped the staff of the fallen colors and ran for the head of the column. The fire of the rebels was something terrible, and men fell around me on every hand."
Wounded in several places, Kearney crawled his way to safety and proclaimed to fellow soldiers of the 54th,
"The old flag never touched the ground."
In 1900, Kearney would receive the Medal of Honor for his valor 37 years earlier, becoming the first African American to earn the honor. Through their actions, the 54th helped convince a skeptical public and military that black men could and would fight bravely. Frederick Douglass wrote,
"After the 54th had distinguished itself with so much credit in the hour of trial, the desire to send more such troops to the front became pretty general."
Also, in the weeks after the assault on Wagner, General Ulysses S. Grant would write to President Lincoln, saying,
"I have given the subject of arming the Negro my hearty support."
He said that the use of black soldiers would be the heaviest blow yet given the Confederacy.
And that by arming the Negro we have added a powerful ally. They will make good soldiers. And taking them from the enemy weakens him in the same proportion they strengthen us.
Despite suffering heavy casualties, the heroic efforts of the 54th Regiment inspired the nation to begin mass recruitment and mobilization of black soldiers. They paved the way for more than 180,000 black men joining the United States forces, which ultimately helped turn the tide of the war. Therefore, by the end of the Civil War, roughly 179,000 black men, which was 10% of the Union Army, served as soldiers in the U.S. Army, and another 19,000 served in the Navy. Black soldiers served in artillery and infantry and performed all non-combat support functions that sustain an army as well. Black carpenters, chaplains, cooks, guards, laborers, nurses, scouts, spies, steamboat pilots, surgeons, and teamsters also contributed to the war cause, and there were nearly 80 black commissioned officers. Moreover, because of prejudice against them, black units were not used in combat as extensively as they might have been. Nevertheless, the soldiers served with distinction in a number of battles. Black infantrymen fought gallantly at Milliken's Bend, L.A., Port Hudson, L.A., Petersburg, VA, and Nashville, TN. Unfortunately, about 40,000 black soldiers died over the course of the war, with 30,000 saddled with infection or disease. The July 1863 assault on Fort Wagner, SC, in which the 54th Regiment of Massachusetts Volunteers lost 2/3 of their officers and half of their troops, was memorably dramatized in the film Glory. And by war's end, 16 black soldiers had been awarded the Medal of Honor for their valor. Thus, the bravery of the 54th not only contributed to the Union's war effort, but also played a crucial role in changing public perception of black Americans, leading to greater acceptance and eventual civil rights advancements. Going forward, the next in line is number 3, the Tuskegee Airmen. The Tuskegee Airmen were the first African-American military aviators in the United States Armed Forces. Before World War II, leaders of the Army Air Corps, predecessor to the modern-day Air Force, barred African Americans from serving in uniform. Facing mounting public pressure in the years before the war, the U.S. government ordered the removal of some restrictions against black aviators, first by opening civilian training programs in 1939, and then by accepting black pilots into racially segregated units of the Army Air Corps in 1941. A new air base at Tuskegee, Alabama, became the center for the training program of black air personnel, first with the 99th Fighter Squadron, and later with the 332nd Fighter Group. African Americans contributed to the war effort, serving in the Mediterranean Combat Theater, flying from bases in North Africa and Italy, while supporting operations against German forces. During World War II, the Tuskegee Airmen became the first group of African American pilots to serve in the U.S. Army Air Corps. During their years of operation, from 1940 to 1946, 996 pilots were trained at Tuskegee Army Airfield. Approximately 445 were deployed overseas, and 150 lost their lives during that period. 66 pilots were killed in action or accidents, and 32 were captured and held as prisoners of war. Despite facing racial discrimination and skepticism about their abilities, the Tuskegee Airmen would prove their mettle in combat, escorting bombers and achieving an impressive record of success. Their performance not only contributed to the Allied victory, but also helped to challenge segregation in the military. The success of the Tuskegee Airmen was instrumental in the eventual desegregation of the U.S. Armed Forces in 1948, marking a significant step toward civil rights for all Americans. Moving forward to number 4, the Montford Point Marines. The Montford Point Marines were the first African-American Marines trained at the segregated Montford Point camp at Jacksonville, North Carolina, between 1942 to 1949. In 1942, the U.S. allowed black men to enlist in the Marine Corps for the first time. This was during World War II and resulted in more than 19,000 black recruits being sent to Montford Point, North Carolina, for basic training. The segregated training facility was opened in August 1942. This part of the camp was a swampy, wildlife-ridden forest area. The area's animals and insects varied from absurd amounts of mosquitoes and deer flies to bears and snakes. The flat plain was interlaced with brackish creeks, along with rapidly growing shrubs and poison ivy. Formidable climates made for harsh tests of physical and mental endurance, with the summer temperature often peaking above 100 degrees, and the winter weather occasionally dropping below 10 degrees. However, the first recruits who arrived began training before construction was even completed, and they were assigned tent-like structures before concrete block barracks were built. Despite facing severe discrimination and harsh conditions, these men served with distinction in the Pacific Theater. Their bravery and dedication helped to break down racial barriers within the Marine Corps and set a precedent for future integration. The history of Montford Point and the brave men who trained there is a testament to the price African Americans had to pay in order to gain acceptance into one of the nation's most respected institutions. Another instance worthy of note is number 5, the Vietnam War and the fight for equality. The Vietnam War was the first American war in which black and white troops were not formally segregated, and even saw significant growth in the number of African Americans engaged in battlefield combat, though some de facto segregation still occurred. In the 1960s and 1970s, the United States' long history of racial inequality and segregation culminated in the Civil Rights Movement. The social and political turmoil crept through American society, including the U.S. military. At the same time, the military organization struggled with its own forms of institutional discrimination. As the war progressed and the nature of the unrest in U.S. society evolved, the military experienced changes in its mission, organization, and personnel. Within this context, African American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines faced a unique and difficult challenge. They bravely served their country while simultaneously bearing the burden of second-class citizenship. During the advisory period and as the war escalated, African Americans consistently volunteered and re-enlisted, serving in numbers roughly proportionate to their overall population percentage. Many volunteered for combat units because, as African American Green Beret Melvin Morris pointed out,
it was the prestigious thing to do, and if you got in, you went.
These units also offered faster promotions and additional pay. By 1966, African Americans represented over 20% of the Army's 2 airborne units in Vietnam, and at the same time, they frequently lacked access to the same economic and educational resources as whites. However, in spite of the segregation, many people of color still served with distinction, earning medals for bravery and valor. The war galvanized the civil rights movement, as returning veterans became advocates for social justice, using their experiences to challenge systemic racism and inequality in the United States. Thus, the legacy of black soldiers in Vietnam is a reminder of the complex interplay between military service and civil rights. And, finally, another impact worthy of stating is number 6, the roles played by black women in the military. While much attention is given to male soldiers, black women have also had to play a crucial role in the military. During the Civil War, women stepped into many non-traditional roles for the time. Many women supported the war effort as nurses and aides, while others took a more upfront approach and secretly enlisted in the Army or served as spies and smugglers. Women were forced to adapt to the vast social changes affecting the nation, and their ability and willingness to assume these new roles helped shape the United States. About 6,000 women performed nursing duties for the federal forces. It is estimated that approximately 181 black nurses served in convalescent and U.S. government hospitals during the war. Although forbidden to join the military at the time, over 400 women still served as secret soldiers in the Civil War. It was relatively easy for them to pass through the recruiter's station, since few questions were asked, as long as one looked the part. Women bound their breasts when necessary, padded the waists of their trousers, cut their hair short, and even adopted masculine names. As regiments faced the reality of war, some women rallied soldiers to fight, bearing the regimental colors on the march, or even participating in battle. Daughters of the regiment, as they were commonly referred to, were part of some Civil War units. This title probably originated to designate an honorary guardian angel or nurse. During World War II, the Women's Army Corps, WAC, and other organizations saw the enlistment of black women who served as nurses, clerks, and in various support roles. Their contributions were vital to the war effort, and they faced unique challenges, including racism and sexism. Regardless, there were women of color who were considered American heroes. These black women also broke barriers while serving in the U.S. military. They worked on the front lines or provided support to U.S. soldiers and civilian employees. One of these remarkable women is Cathay Williams. Though over 400 women served in the Civil War posing as male soldiers, Williams was the first African-American woman to enlist and the only documented woman to serve in the United States Army while disguised as a man during the Indian Wars. Williams is also the only known female Buffalo Soldier. Williams' determination to serve her country demonstrates the extraordinary feats women have accomplished simply trying to live their lives as a free people. Another example of women who has done remarkably well in the U.S. Army is Commander Sergeant Major Mildred C. Kelly. Mildred C. Kelly served in the U.S. Army from March 1947 to April 1976. The Army wasn't her first career choice. After graduation from Knoxville College in Tennessee, she briefly taught high school before deciding to join the Army. In 1972, she would become the first black female sergeant major in the U.S. Army. 2 years later, in 1974, she made the ranks of the first black female command sergeant major at Aberdeen Proving Ground. This made her the first black woman to hold the highest enlisted position at a major Army installation, whose population was predominantly male. After retirement, she continued to serve in a different capacity by remaining active on various boards, such as the Women in Military Service for America Memorial Foundation, Maryland Veterans Commission, and the Veterans Advisory Board, until she passed away from cancer in 2003. A third example is Brigadier General Hazel W. Johnson Brown. Becoming a nurse was Hazel W. Johnson Brown's dream. Her career would begin at the Harlem Hospital as an operating room nurse after completing her studies. In 1955, 7 years after President Truman eliminated segregation in the military, Hazel W. Johnson Brown made the decision to enlist in the U.S. Army. She impressed her superiors with her incredible talent and taking multiple assignments across the world. One of Johnson Brown's assignments included Japan, where she trained nurses on their way to Vietnam. She made history after being promoted in 1979 to Brigadier General. With that promotion, she took charge of 7,000 nurses in the Army Nurse Corps, making her the first black woman general officer to hold that post. When Brigadier General Johnson Brown received her promotion, she said,
"Race is an incidence of birth. I hope the criterion for selection did not include race, but competence."
Brigadier General Johnson Brown served in the U.S. Army from 1955 to 1983, receiving multiple awards and decorations. However, let's look into a final example, amongst many more, of a black female who made military history. Lieutenant Colonel Charity Adams Early. Charity Adams Early served as the highest-ranking black woman officer during World War II. In December 1944, then Major Early deployed to Europe, leading the first black women's auxiliary corps unit to serve overseas. The Army gave Early command of the 6888th Central Postal Battalion. Stationed in Birmingham, England, they organized and sorted mail for delivery to U.S. soldiers in the European theater. Despite segregated living conditions, her troops diligently worked around the clock 7 days a week, working in 3 shifts to ensure the delivery of millions of letters. Given 6 months to clear months of backlogged mail, the unit completed the job in half the time. Early served in Europe until late 1945. For her work in Europe with the 6,668th, Early received a promotion to Lieutenant Colonel, the highest possible rank for a soldier in the Women Army Corps, WAC. Additionally, in 1982, she founded the Black Leadership Development Program that focused on teaching young African Americans to be leaders in their communities. She died in 2002 in Dayton, Ohio. The National Postal Museum, National Women's History Museum, Ohio Women's Hall of Fame, Smithsonian Institute, South Carolina Black Hall of Fame, and many other organizations have recognized her dedicated service and work on promoting opportunities for Black Americans. The legacy of these women paved the way for future generations of female soldiers, leading to greater opportunities and recognition in the military. In closing, the untold impacts of Black American soldiers in history reveals a profound narrative that extends far beyond the battlefield. These soldiers not only fought valiantly for their country, but also played a crucial role in shaping the social, political, and cultural landscape of America. Their contributions during pivotal conflicts, from the Revolutionary War to the Civil War, World Wars, and beyond, challenged prevailing notions of race and citizenship, laying the groundwork for future civil rights advancements. Also, one of the most significant, yet often overlooked impacts, is the way these soldiers served as catalysts for change. Their bravery and sacrifice highlighted the contradictions of a nation that espoused freedom and equality while simultaneously perpetuating systemic racism. The valor of Black soldiers in combat often forced society to confront its prejudices, leading to gradual shifts in public perception and policy. This brings us to the end of yet another video segment. Did you happen to learn a thing or two? Then please share your thoughts with us in the comment section below, and we shall delightfully, as always, pick from them. Don't forget to support our works by hitting the thumb button, share video with your friends and families to keep spreading our eye-opening Black narrative, and kindly subscribe to stay tuned in if you're yet to. We are happy to have you here with us. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.